Today we're going to look at Chapter 7.5. In this section of Chapter 7, we're going to be solving equations that have exponents. And there are two different types of equations we're going to be solving in this chapter. In this section, we're going to be solving equations that have integers or fractions or negative exponents. Now the variable, usually we solve for the variable x. The variable is not going to be in the exponent. In all of these problems, the variable will be in the base. Tomorrow's lesson, the variable will be in the exponent. So there's a real difference between this section of Chapter 7 and the next. There are 3 steps to solving these types of equations. The first thing you're going to do is isolate, which means get it by itself, the variable base, and you can see that all of these equations have x's as their variable. So you're going to get x alone with its integer, fraction, or negative exponent. The second step is you're going to raise both sides, not just one, but both sides of the equation to a power. And this power is going to be the reciprocal of whatever the exponent is. Remember, if you have a negative exponent and you're taking a reciprocal of a negative number, that is also going to be, the reciprocal will also be a negative number. And then the last step is just to simplify your result. So what does this all mean? All we're going to do in these problems are to solve for x. So when we solve for x in the end, you're going to let me know what x is equal to. In question number 1, step 1 says isolate the variable base. So you're going to isolate this x to the 3/2 power. And to do that, you're going to subtract 1 from each side. And you're going to come up with x to the 3/2 is equal to 8. So that's step 1. Get the base alone with its exponent. The second step is to raise both sides of this equation to the reciprocal of that exponent. So you're going to surround each side with parentheses, and you're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of 3/2, which is 2/3. And our rules of exponents say, the power rule says, if you have something raised to a power and then another power, you are going to multiply exponents. So this is x to the 3/2 times 2/3. Well, 3/2 times 2/3 is equal to 1. So this is just x to the 1, which is just equal to x. That's why we raise it to the reciprocal of this, because we want to get x to the first in the end. And now we're going to raise 8 to the 2/3 power. 8 to the 2/3 power, a fractional exponent means a radical. So it's going to be the cubed root of 8 raised up to the second power. The cubed root of 8 is 2. And 2 squared is 4. So the answer is x is equal to 4. And if you want to check your answer, you can say 4 to the 3/2 power, see if that is equal to 1. And I'm just going to pull out my handy-dandy calculator because I usually check my answers on the calculator. So does 4 to the power of 3/2 plus 1, 4 to the power of 3/2 plus 1, does that equal 9? Well, yes, it does, so that checks. Checking on the calculator is usually the fastest. Question number 2, we're going to isolate x to the 4/3 power by adding 1 to both sides, which gives you x to the 4/3 is equal to 16. Now the second step says we're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of 4/3, which is 3/4. 4/3 times 3/4 is 1, so x to the first is equal to 16 to the 3/4 is the 4th root of 16 raised to the 3rd power. The 4th root of 16 is 2. 2 cubed is 8, so x is equal to 8. I'm going to check my answer. Does 8 to the power of 4/3 minus 1, let's see if that is equal to 15. And it is, so my answer checks in the calculator. Number 3, to get rid of this 2 that is beside the x to the negative 1/3, you're going to divide both sides instead of subtract or add. because this is 2 times x to the negative 1/3. Sorry for that phone call in the middle. We have just divided both sides by 2, and so we have x to the negative 1/3 power is equal to 6 over 2 is 3. Second step says we're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of negative 1/3. Well, the reciprocal of negative 1/3 is negative 3 over 1, which is just negative 3. Negative 1/3 times negative 3 is 1, so we have x to the first power is 3 to the negative third. Well, 3 to the negative third is 1 over 3 to the positive third, and 3 to the third is 27. So the x is equal to 1 over 27, and I'm going to see if that one checks in my calculator. What I'm going to do is I'm going to store 1 over 27. I'm going to press the store button, which is above the on key. I'm going to store that into my variable x. So now my calculator thinks x is equal to 1 over 27. And now I'm going to see what 2x to the power of negative 1/3 is equal to, and hopefully it's equal to 6 like the original problem said. And it is, so my answer checks. 1/27 is what x is equal to. On number 4, we're going to subtract 3 from each side first. 4 minus 3 is 1, and we get 2x to the negative 1/4 is equal to 1. Now we're going to divide each side by 2, which gives us x to the negative 1/4 is equal to 1/2. Now the base is isolated with its exponent, so we are going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of that exponent. The reciprocal of negative 1/4 is negative 4 over 1. Negative 1/4 times negative 4 is 1, so x to the first is equal to, if you have a fraction raised up to a negative exponent, remember the negative exponent flips that fraction upside down, so we have 2 over 1, and the negative 4 becomes a positive 4. 2 to the 4th is 16, so the x value is 16. Let's see if that'll check out. 2 times x is 16 to the power of negative 1/4 plus 3 should be equal to 4. And it is, so my answer checks. Number 5, you're going to add 5 to both sides first. 4x to the 2/3 is equal to 25. Now you're going to divide both sides by 4 to get x all alone with its base, the base with its exponent. And 25/4 doesn't simplify down, so I'm just going to leave it as 25 over 4. You're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of 2/3, which is 3/2. 2/3 times 3/2 is 1, so I'll come up here and say x to the first is equal to 25/4 to the 3/2. Well, 3/2 means you have a square root of 25/4, and that whole thing gets raised up to the 3rd power. The square root of 25 over 4 is the square root of 25, which is 5, over the square root of 4, which is 2, and that whole thing's got to be raised up to the 3rd power. 5 to the 3rd is 125. 2 to the 3rd is 8. So my final answer, x is equal to 125 over 8. And now let me check my answer. I think I will let 125 over 8, I'm going to store that value into x. And so now my calculator thinks 125 over 8 is my x value because I told it it was. And now I'm going to put in the calculator 4x to the 2/3, the letter x, minus 5, and hopefully that's going to be equal to 20. And it is, so my answer checks. Number 6, you're going to add 1 to both sides first and get in parentheses x plus 2 to the 2/3 power is equal to 3 plus 1. Add 1 to both sides. 3 plus 1 is equal to 4. Now the base is x plus 2. You can't distribute this exponent into this sum. You can't call this x to the 2/3 and 2 to the 2/3 because that's not the rule. There's no rule for that. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of 2/3, which is 3/2. And 2/3 times 3/2 is 1, so we're left with x plus 2 raised up to the first power is equal to 4 to the 3/2. Well, 4 to the 3/2 is the square root of 4 raised up to the third. The square root of 4 is 2, and 2 cubed is 8. So we have x plus 2 is equal to 8. If you subtract 2 from each side, you're going to get x is equal to 8 minus 2 is 6. And now let's see if that checks. Does 6 plus 2 raised up to the power of 2/3 minus 1 equal 3? And it does, so I've checked my answer. Now what we're going to do is use our calculator because we are going to be solving these to the nearest hundredth. Whenever you see that you have to round anything, you know you're going to be pulling out your calculator instead of doing everything by hand up in like what we did up above. So x to the 3/5 is 25. So we're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal, which is 5/3. And we're going to just see what 25 raised up to the 5/3 power is. 213.747. Oh, to the nearest hundredth. That's 2 decimal places. So it's 213.75. And that's all we can do with that one. If we check our answer, we're going to not be quite correct because we're doing some rounding. So the rounding will throw our final answer off if we check it in the calculator. So I'll just assume I know what I'm doing. On number 8, 2x to the 4th is 25. Well, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can either call this 2 to the 4th times x to the 4th, or you can just right now take both sides to the reciprocal of 4, which is 1/4. And then you'll be left with 2x because 4 times 1/4 is 1, so you're left with 2x raised up to the first power is equal to 25 raised up to the 1/4 power, which is this long decimal. And then I'm going to divide by 2. So we've got 2.236067977. Divide both sides by 2. Just hit your divided by 2. And looks like it's 1.118. Rounded to 2 decimal places is 1.12. And you'd get the same answers if you distributed or if you placed this 4 exponent on both the 2 and the 4. Just a couple different ways to do that. Now the last 2 examples. Number 9, we're going to divide both sides by 5 to get x alone with its -3. So dividing both sides by 5 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/5. Or if you want to take your calculator and do 5/6 divided by 5, you can put parentheses around 5/6. There are a number of different ways. But I just know that when you divide something by 5, it's the same thing as multiplying by 1/5. Well, these 5's will cancel, and you're left with x to the -3rd power is equal to 1/6. Now we're going to raise both sides to the -1/3 power. And now I'm going to get my calculator out and use my alpha y equals option 1 key because I need to know what 1/6 to the power of -1/3 is. And it looks like it's 1.817, which rounds to 1.82. And then the last example, we're going to have to get rid of the 1/2 so we can be left with x to the -1/2 power. So getting rid of a 1/2, you're going to multiply each side by 2. So we're left with x to the negative 1/2 power is equal to 4/3 times 2. Well, 4/3 times 2 is 8/3. And now we're going to raise both sides to the reciprocal of negative 1/2, which is negative 2 over 1. We can actually do this without a calculator. Let's try this one. So x is equal to 8/3 flipped upside down is 3/8 because of the negative exponent flipping the fraction, and then that becomes the second power, and then 3/8 squared is 9 over 64. Well, that's the fractional answer, but they want this rounded to the nearest hundredth. So I think I will just take my calculator out and see what 9 over 64 is. And it is 0.14 as a decimal. 0.14. So there it is, rounded to the nearest hundredth. Zoom in on that a little bit. So that's it for today.